Well, it's August the 21st, and the ongoing debacle in Afghanistan is consuming most of the news, I guess, overshadowing the earthquake disaster in Haiti. And so that's kind of the situation. Uh, President Biden tried to reassure everybody yesterday with some completely inaccurate statements about the situation, which was then almost immediately contradicted by lower level officials in the Defense Department and so forth. So the situation is still messed up as of this morning. Now they're telling people to not go to the airport, and Americans not to go to the airport because of the intense Taliban checkpoints that are slowing up the flow of traffic. And so, of course, the situation is dynamic, and by the time most people see this, no doubt it'll evolve in some direction, either better or worse. I wouldn't be shocked if it isn't worse. So anyway, if you like these videos, remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Give me a like, because it definitely helps. Even if you have, it helps out with the algorithm. And if you want to be notified, click the bell. Yeah, and so that's our situation on that. I think that one of the biggest developments since the last video is the revelation that units of the British and French military have been able to go outside of the airport to collect their own citizens and bring them back in, whereas the U.S. up to now has done very little of that, except for a single episode in which Chinook helicopters were flown over to a hotel not far away. I've heard differing distance estimates. Some was just a few hundred yards, and others was up to a mile. I don't know. How these numbers keep getting thrown around inaccurate, but apparently it wasn't that far away, and because the Taliban have put in so much harassment and blocking of people getting out, that they just flew over them with a helicopter and picked up the people and then flew them back. I think this is a fairly dangerous situation, which has remained more stable, in fact, than I would have probably originally guessed it would. What we have a situation here where we have a lot of armed men on all sides, people shooting guns, particularly on the Afghan side, the Taliban side, if you want to say that, and mostly, I think, warning shots, although not always. Sometimes they fire into crowds when they do some kind of protest with the Afghan flag of the previous government. I guess you'd call it previous at this point, since the president of Afghanistan left the country and basically declared every man, woman, and child for themselves. I'm getting out of Dodge, so I shouldn't laugh at that. It's sick. But the point is, it's just for kind of, in a lot of ways, this is sort of predictable as what would ultimately happen. I think that that's kind of our state for the moment. There seems to be increasing pressure on the U.S. government to do something similar to what the French and British have done. One of the problems may be is, the Taliban and company aren't running around shouting so much death to UK or death to France, but they're definitely saying death to America. And maybe the presence of American troops would elicit a more spontaneous reaction if we try to do the same thing. And that could end up in a major street battle, because once that happens, it wouldn't take much to catalyze a complete mayhem, and with a lot of civilians in the middle of it too. And once a full scale, we do have elite troops there, and if they do go into action, like I said in the previous video, I don't doubt that we could probably retake part or all of the city. But the point is that what losses on all sides, particularly on the American troops and I would say bystanders. With that much ammo flying around in areas that are that crowded, which what would start happening, you can imagine. But we can think back to the Black Hawk Down incident in Somalia to get some idea of the kind of thing we could be talking about, basically. Only it'll be on a much larger scale. But on the other hand, it looks like there's a pressure, and I think that if we could create some kind of initiative, to go out and rescue people. But the problem is, where are they all? How do we locate all of them in this mess? I suspect many of them have gone to various hiding places, or may not where they normally would live. The Taliban are going door to door looking for people. I heard they executed the police chief of Kabul the other day. Uh, so this is an ongoing case. Now, what's also interesting that we have here is that the Russians on one side and the Chinese on the other side are trying to cozy up to the Taliban, apparently. I kind of have a feeling that this may not work out that good in the long term. Economically, the Chinese offer sounds, I suspect, attractive. But the problem may very well end up being that, on the one hand, Muslims are being persecuted inside the China, the Uyghurs, and on the other hand, the Taliban are, extreme Islamists. So it's hard to know whether or not they can really actually get along very well. On the side of where that might work is, of course, that Pakistan, which is kind of instrumental in backing the Taliban, or at least at a minimum standing down and letting them operate within their territory, has a very strong, favorable relationship to China because they're kind of allied with China versus India in the regional power struggle. So that may be a factor, plus just the money alone that would encourage a Taliban-Chinese cooperation in spite of this sort of thing. On the other hand, groups like the Al-Qaeda and all, which are part of the Taliban, they're kind of linked, really. They're allied. So you're going to have a situation there which will be kind of, how we say, maybe unstable. And these groups tend to fragment, so it's hard to know what might happen. And it also maybe, at any moment, the situation could become a lot worse, or maybe the threat that the U.S. would do something might intimidate them. But let's face it, given that the fact the U.S. has pretty much thrown away most of its strategic capabilities in the area, it leaves us in a very vulnerable situation. If we'd have had a more rational pull-out strategy, where probably before we actually pulled out, we literally surged not just even more troops than we have in there now to strategic locations to secure evacuation points. So we would be controlling the streets of Kabul and not the Taliban. Then it'd be quite much easier to rationally process the people that are looking for to escape, whether they be U.S. citizens or people that are considered people that work with us that are on the Taliban's execution list that we would like to, give humanitarian relief to, if you will. Certainly there's they have a lot better case than, let's say, a typical person just coming across the border into Texas saying, gee, we'd like to have a better life, and or false claims of persecution, which they're really not experiencing for the most part in Central America. But anyhow, that's kind of the state that we're in right now, and we'll just have to see how this develops. Obviously, the U.S. has lost face in the international community pretty greatly by this, and obviously we have an ineffectual president right now. The debate seems to be raging on: is he just a big-time liar, or is he actually mentally out of touch with reality that he doesn't even know what's going on, doesn't even know how to put together a cogent lie if he wanted to? Although you'd think his staff would be putting this together for him. My general thought is that they're also just scrambling too, given that they've obviously messed up, and even the Democrats that have been gutsy enough to speak out on the subject are pretty much admitting it, like Leon Panetta, former Secretary of Defense, I believe at the time of the bin Laden raid, for instance. And remember that Biden was against the bin Laden raid. So, we're not dealing with, we're really dealing with the B team of the Democrat Party, and that's not a very good group to begin with. So, the other thing I think we have to look forward to here, is when Congress comes back, there's also some issues I'd like to kind of briefly address here. As the Democrats could at this point be more dangerous than ever. It's occurred to me, a trapped animal can be a little bit more dangerous than one that's free to move. And I was a little bit noted that the S1 bill is apparently being modified to meet some of Joe Manchin's requirements. Senator Manchin of West Virginia, And on the other hand, they did the last action of the Senate before it adjourned was to pass a discharge petition on a party line vote of a S1 bill. Meanwhile, there's another bill brewing in the House, the H4 bill, which is really trying to increase federal oversight of elections and try to reverse a variety of Supreme Court rulings that sort of restricted some of the things they were doing to interfere in state election laws. So that's another thing that's coming across the way one of these days. And I think we need to be cautious that while we're definitely distracted by Afghanistan, things are brewing on the home front that could be even more consequential to our future here. And that's something to think about. I don't know what this means. Whether, there's two ways of looking at it. One way to look at it is that Manchin is simply trying to position himself within the Democrat Party. I mean, after all, he is a committee chairman, and so he may be trying to position himself just to defend himself against internal party attacks, of saying, yes, I am for something along this line, and if you make these compromises, I could vote for it. Does that mean he's also prepared to reverse his position on the filibuster to get it passed? Because barring that, I doubt it would get passed, because I don't think there's any 60 votes for even the modifications he made. Now, and even there, I'm not sure what those modifications really mean. I mean, I've heard talk about like voter ID. Is he simply saying that the bill would now permit states to have voter ID, or is he saying it would require all states to have voter ID, which many don't? See, these are things that are kind of unclear. What about vote harvesting? I've heard no mentioning of that. What about this thing about the 6-to-1 plus up of public funds for private contributions? That's another thing that it's kind of very controversial. I don't think that was in his modification. And also, it's also unclear. I guess it would pass the House if they get it through the Senate, whatever they can get through, because of the Democrats, but controlling the House. But I'm just saying this is something to keep your eye on too, as things go forward. There's a lot of things happening, and distraction is a major factor. So I think that we'll just have to wait and see again how this situation in Afghanistan unfolds. I mean, one concern I think I have is with this, instead of having an orderly situation where people were removed, over a period of a month before we actually pulled out, it would seem to me that we would have a better chance to vet the people. Right now, with all the chaos, I'm not sure how thoroughly we're able to vet who's getting on the plane and who isn't. I mean, what if some Al Qaeda actually succeed of getting on the airplane and getting into the country this way? And then immediately go back to terrorism. That's another issue. Which we also have to consider that we've definitely given a massive arms cache to the Taliban and Al Qaeda with this pullout. And of course, we've often had, our troops have often had some real advantages in terms of some of the equipment we had, like night vision equipment and some of the optics on the rifles and so forth for just, infantry combat scenarios. And now it's going to look like that we're going to have a fairly well-equipped group of terrorists in the world that we'll be fighting now. So it's probably going to be, make things a little more dangerous for our people in the future. This is not a good development all around. And finally, of course, I suppose most people will disagree with me on this one, but I don't see why there was always this big imperative to leave anyhow. We got the thing down to kind of a low roar. Like I said, we hadn't had any troops killed in action for 18 months. We basically were providing kind of technical assistance, and the fighting was being handled by this, Afghan army. And you can show some training film from 2009 of how pathetic some of the trainees were. That's 11 years old or 12 years old. I mean, I agree that this is, I think it's probably inaccurate to characterize the entire Afghan force that way. I think that the collapse of Afghan resistance was probably done largely because, we had indicated that we were leaving. And once that was the case, I think that, as I said before, I think a lot of their pay got confiscated by people that planning on putting it in foreign bank accounts and fleeing themselves at the higher levels of government. And that left everybody in the lurch. And once the word got out, every man for himself, that's exactly what happened. And the whole thing just collapsed like a string of dominoes, you know. I mean, you know, the French army at Waterloo at the end of the battle, when the old guard just retreated because of you know, a little bit of an ambush that the British pulled on them. You know, when the rest of the army saw that, they all just that turned into a rabble too. And it's quite possible the same army could have won the battle if certain tactical things that happened just a little differently. You know, the collapse of the French army again in 1940. You know, I mean, these things happen this way sometimes, and you know, once we indicated we were leaving, I think the confidence that anybody had in that whole system was totally destroyed. And so I think if we just maintained a relatively small presence, which I think was running under like $9 billion a year, with essentially no casualties, we could have probably maintained our intelligence position there and kind of had a foothold against the Chinese and Russian encroachment. You know, it might have been a valuable thing to do. I think people are getting a little bit, you know, looking back to how it was when we were actually fighting the war for them and had 100,000 troops there, and we see all those veterans horribly maimed and so forth on TV, you know, and all that. So I think we got away from that scenario at that point. But anyway, it is what it is. Afghanistan has fallen, and nobody's going to take it back now, I don't think. So, so it is, and we'll have to see what the next developments are. Anyway, I'll end this for now, and we'll see how things unfold. By the way, you can follow me on social media on Twitter, Gab, and Parler, and which you'll get more, you know, updates on a more day-by-day basis.